Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the Mark video. I hope everybody's had a good week this week. I'm going to cover a couple of different topics this week. Last week, first of all, I'd mentioned that this week I was going to focus on a presentation and some of the messaging around educating the market, talking about the value of going through a digital transformation and types of problems essentially that customers can solve with it. So I'll talk a little bit about that, give an update about other things that I've been pursuing this past week, some of the challenges that we hit and good news that we received this week as well. And in advance of that, to get things started, I also want to answer a question that I received last week on YouTube from Rami. So let's jump into it. So Rami on YouTube asked, on our YouTube channel, asked, what is the particular industry or market segmentation that I'm going after? So I'll give a brief description of what that is. First of all, we're really focusing on the upper end of the SMB to mid-market customers. These are probably customers who have anywhere between 50 to about 2,000 employees. The reason why I didn't necessarily want to go after the SMB because likely those customers, first of all, are too young or they may not necessarily have the budget for the types of services that we provide. They likely have also a smaller contractor, independent contractor that we're already working with for some of these types of solutions that they can put together. And then the enterprise customers, I realized that they likely also have the larger consulting firms that they're already working with on their digital transformation. To further refine the particular segment of the market that we're going after, I also thought these are companies that need to be about 15 years or older, and maybe they're having some scalability challenges. A lot of that scalability revolving around how they're putting together the various process, especially paper-based process that they're pursuing within their organization. And the reason for that age and looking at scalability is because most likely companies of that age started out with, of course, certain technologies in early 2000, but they didn't necessarily pursue an automation for some of their process, and as a result of that, they're having scalability challenges. Now, since then, of course, I've also refined that a bit further and looking at firms that are within financial services, wealth management, a few other segments as well. And I won't get into too much more detail of that. There's also a particular set of profiles. We have 4 different buyer profiles that we've set up. And if you guys are interested, let me know. I'll be happy to start detailing some of that as well and how I came about with those persona profiles. Okay, now let's talk about what I was planning on working on this week. So the plan for this week was really to begin to put together some material that would help me address the initial presentations within the segment that I just mentioned. And I would do that essentially by making various presentations locally to business groups, to my alma mater, business schools, really talking about what is digital transformation, what's digital transaction management, what are some of the common problems, for example, that are addressed using those technologies, how does the use of particular technologies accelerate ROI on those products using particular types of patterns, solution patterns, things along those lines, really education. For folks to begin to think about or trigger in their mind how are they going to solve their problems using these types of technologies. This was really meant as a way of also not only educating the market, but showing that we are the experts in that particular space. So in that process, I also found out about a sales seminar that was taking place this past week. I had already received an email on it, but I decided to register for it. It wasn't too long. It was only about 3 hours in the evening. And I got a lot out of it, actually. I thought there was a pretty big takeaway, at least for me, when I attended that. And that was, it reminded me of curiosity selling, the idea that you ask a lot of questions and ask a lot of open-ended questions where you'll begin to explore what the business problem is that the customer is pursuing. But then the seminar reminded me of how we can take that further. Essentially, having conversations not just about, hey, customer, what is your business problem? But about developing a solution that the customer wasn't even thinking of. So coming to us essentially with the customer saying, hey, this is the particular business process we have, this is the pain point that is producing for us, and we're thinking that we need to automate it, and we don't need to make much more changes to it. But then they're directing those folks through the various conversations that we'll have with them about a means of addressing that particular business problem in a different way than what they've done in the past, so that, in fact, we could reduce some of the timeline that's usually associated with running a process through. So imagine, for example, a sales process that a company has. They're using particular paper, or it's just manual. It's not even paper. It's all digitized already, but it's a very manual process. They email contracts out. They get revisions back. That's redlined in Microsoft Word, and then they have to review it. And after review, it goes through approvals with their legal team, with their procurement team, and then it finally goes out for signing to the customer, and then a final review internally or a counter signature by someone within the company. But imagine essentially looking at that and thinking, well, we could take that 10 steps that you have right now and reduce it down to 3. And the customer hadn't thought about, for example, doing that. And they hadn't thought about, well, what would be the best means of being able to reduce it to 3 while reducing our risk as well, associated with why we have so many reviews or so many approvals by so many people for different dollar amounts, for different language, so on and so forth. So really it's demonstration of how you'd be able to receive value from us in solving that type of problem for you, or really coming up with those unique solutions. And this is not the kind of thing where, for example, I can go in and simply say, hey, I'm the authority in this, or I'm an expert in this. Anybody can say that. They can claim it on a piece of paper, they can claim it on a presentation, but how do I make it so that I'm not just anybody going in and saying, we're the experts, we're the authority in the use of DocuSign and digital transformation and digital transaction management? So that triggered a lot of thought, the seminar itself, and beginning to think through that process. And I realized that I think we have a piece missing from our lineup in general. And that piece is a demonstration of that value. So one of the things that we do as part of an engagement is we typically do an on-site assessment, and then during that on-site assessment, we talk about the use case in detail and begin to actually make recommendations on how to solve the problem. That's where essentially that shortening of the process comes in. That's where we make recommendations on best practices so that the customer doesn't have to go through the trial and error. So what if I can pull that forward? What if I can actually bring that into the sales cycle and have a focused discussion, not about all the different problems that the customer is trying to solve, or even the handful of problems the customer is trying to solve, but one of them. And then solve it. So not just talk about what you can do, but actually solve the problem, so that the takeaway at the end of a session that we have with the customer is that tomorrow they're out there and actually using the solution we put together. So that's what I began to think about, and maybe having an offering in the sales cycle where we say, all right, let us demonstrate to you what our expertise level is while solving a business problem for you right now. So I got this actually from a friend of mine with whom I've worked in the past, a gentleman by the name of Mark. If he's watching, he'll know who he is. He told me that he sees us as, I love this line, he sees us as the chiropractors of business process. So we really would come in and help align or get a process to a healthy stage where the customer is able to more quickly implement the solution that they wouldn't have been able to do on their own. They may have suffered through multiple trials and errors, and they may have arrived even at the same solution, but instead of them doing it, going through the trial and error, maybe even talking to some peers afterwards, getting some best practices for them, it may take them 6 months. But with us coming in, essentially, they would be able to realize that value within 4 to 6 weeks. And that's for a single use case, let's say. And so Mark made a very good point, is that, focus on that. Focus on talking about how you're able to increase the value of the services that you provide by doing that demonstration, or talking about how you've done this for some of the other customers in the past. Not just saying we've done it, but also give examples of how you've done it. So demonstration is key. And he actually made a good point. He said, the reason why we got won over when we started using DocuSign was because we had a great demonstration of a solution right in that first meeting that made us sit back and say, holy cow, this is going to save us quite a lot of time, and in the process, quite a lot of money within the organization. So that's where I began to formulate essentially this offering that I thought I could make available during the sales cycle. But let me actually put a pause on that for a second and talk about the rest of the week. The rest of the week, it was good. It wasn't great. We actually had some not so good news, and it was disguised, I think, as not so good news. But it was in the end good news as well. We've been working on some large deals recently, and what we learned is that as a result of the deals being more inclusive of additional services that we're going to provide, it's going to require some additional work essentially to go through procurement, and for us to make the proper documentation available, business justification essentially of how we're going to get the value that the customer wants to get by using our services. So it's prolonging the sales cycle, but at the same time, it's a validation that what we're offering is in fact what these customers are looking for. So that was with 2 of the 3 largest deals that we've been pursuing. And then I also started working on some strategic partnerships with some product and consulting firms that I've worked with in the past. So reaching out to some of former employers, also reached out to Accenture, for example, and beginning to offer essentially that specialization of being the niche authority or experts within the digital transformation, digital transaction management, and more specifically the product DocuSign that we can offer through them. So those companies likely are not going to build a practice around DocuSign, but we can essentially be that practice where they outsource some of that work to us for us to implement for their customers. And I think incidentally, this actually goes back to that first point as far as the offering that I'm planning on putting in the market during the sales cycle, but also about the authority that we bring about this particular subject, because if we have, for example, the Accentures of the world coming in and saying, yes, in fact, these guys are the authority on DocuSign, they are our trusted team for implementing it, that in and of itself is going to reinforce a message that we can deliver to customers of saying, Accenture, these other product companies, DocuSign itself, trust us for delivering these types of solutions. So, what's the plan for this week then? Then the plan for this week is for me to continue to focus on developing and refining the messaging during the sales cycle, and some of these presentations, the material that I need to put together for educating the market about the types of solutions that can be put together using these platforms and products like DocuSign, Salesforce, Conga, eOriginal. What I'll also do in my presentations, taking Mark's point, is aside from doing the demonstration that I'm thinking of, is I'll also begin to put together some examples from 2 to 3 industries that we've worked with in the past, where there's a statement of problem or the challenge that the customer was facing, how they thought they were going to solve the problem, how we actually helped them figure out a more optimized solution for the problem, and then what were the results that they received from it. So these will be brief, but I'm hoping that they'll be demonstrative of our experience. So maybe a one slide that essentially has all of that information about each of the examples. So with that, I bid you guys farewell. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk again next Friday. Don't forget, if you want to post some comments, look below and place your comments there. Any questions you have, I'll be happy to answer them next week. Take care.